You are in for an interesting ride.
Hello and welcome to another ETN Files interview. I am delighted. This is pretty much probably going to be the last of 2021. And maybe, like some of you who've been decluttering in preparation for a tidy 2022, I have been decluttering some electronic files. And in those, I came across an interview that I'd almost forgotten about. And I took that in, 2019. Yeah, 2019, it was July, it was the Awakening Conference, and I had a chat with Linda Moulton Howe. I was delighted because I'd been wanting to catch up with her and we just had a little window of opportunity, and this is something of an autobiographical interview, so I think you're going to find it quite interesting. I'm always fascinated by the genesis of people's work, what was the real driver behind them, and where that inspiration and impulse took them. I hope you enjoy that and wish you all a very happy Christmas, 2021 style. Over and out from the ET Newsroom.
etc., but he had lifelong experiences. But he also was an eyewitness to a cattle mutilation which happened, but he's had bilocation in things, clones, also linked to a UK serial killer as well.
And that, when you say 44?
His name of the book?
It was the age he was at when he had started having a huge download, but it was also verified by his disabled brother.
You gave that book to me.
I sent it to you. You've actually got a copy. I don't know where you.
When did you send it?
It's some time ago now, when it first came out.
I'm just in the title is 44.
So hello everybody, we're here at Manchester. It's the 20th of July 2019, and I tell you, I came down yesterday. It took about 7 hours from the southeast coast, and most of those hours were in torrential rain, and then we enjoyed some more torrential rain on the corrugated roof. So anyway, I am delighted to finally meet up with Linda Moulton Howe, and I want to find out what it is that makes Linda tick in this direction of the unusual, the anomalous. And so we're going to have a few words with her in between her really busy schedule. So thank you so much. Welcome to the ET Newsroom. And just to ask you, what is there a first thing that happened or occurred that got you started on this journey?
Yeah. Well, I had done my graduate work at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, and in working, I was the only female with a class of 27 guys. There were 28 of us in that master's program. And we were making documentary films. And it was the first very valuable lesson. All guys. That meant carrying equipment, doing sound, doing camera, doing lighting. Each one of us had to do everything. And I knew if I whined once about not being able to carry a piece of equipment, I would be destroyed. So I was learning that there was no possibility that I could ever whine or complain, and it would be a lot better if I found ways to lift heavy equipment without even asking my colleagues. And it set me then on a very independent path, just because of the environment of being the only female in a class with 27 guys, in which each one of us, in order to get our master's degree, we had to find the money for production. We had to do scripts, budgets, audio, video, but we could hire, quote unquote, our classmates. And By the time that I graduated from Stanford with a master's degree in communication, I had done a documentary film for the Stanford Medical Center. I had done my master's thesis on the Stanford Linear Accelerator, which at that time, I graduated in 1968, was the very first time that Stanford University was trying to have computers analyze all of the bombardments in the Stanford Linear Accelerator, and that was my master's.
How fascinating is that?
So I was already coming out of Stanford with a goal that I was going to do science, medicine, and the environment in issues in news. And I married one of my classmates. We went to Los Angeles. I get hired by KNBC. He was hired by another. So we were in one of those lives that you grew up, you graduated, you got married, and it all seems completely stable, and we had a child, and in having a child, my then husband, who had been at Yale and Stanford where we met, could see that what was coming in a big way then was going to be cable video.
Yeah.
Had not really penetrated. So he said, I want to go to Harvard and I want to get an MBA because I see this as the future, and that's what we did. At his work at Harvard, I was immediately hired by the ABC television station to do all their medical programming. So for 2 years, I'm going to Mass General and Harvard and everywhere, working on all things related to medical and diagnosis and treatment. It was a very successful weekly show. And now I am becoming set in a ground that is science, medical world, environment, and I was adding astronomy. I did a whole series with people who were very famous at Harvard and at MIT in astronomy. And when my husband graduated, he immediately was hired by then Time Inc., before it joined with Time Warner. And they wanted him to go to what was going to be their new evolving video cable corporation unit that was in Denver, Colorado. And that is how all of these moves, LA, Boston, Denver, happened in a very short period of time. And I am hired, each of these I am just moving and somebody says, we want to hire you. It was really odd how I just kept being hired wherever I went. And I still remember the general manager at the CBS station said, we have been considering buying the series that you have been doing in Boston called House Call. But why should I buy the series when I can hire the producer? So my assignment as being director of special projects at the CBS station was to look at all things related to the state of Colorado in the United States and the bigger planet in these big boxes that I had already been in, science, medicine, and the environment. And I was hired there in 1978. And it was only 1 year later, 1979, I'm with a cameraman and an audio person, and we're working on a completely, having nothing to do really with science. It was a sort of behind the scenes at the Colorado Shakespeare Theater. And so I was stretching my wings at that moment, going into areas that were even way beyond what I had been doing in science. But one of the crew was a man that I had worked with in all of my other work. And he said, Linda, you know how you're a stickler with me to have all of our battery belts charged at night. Back then, people forget. We worked double system. The cameraman had big, huge cameras. The audio guy had Nagras. There was crystal sync. This is why everybody did that. That was to sync up the film and the audio. He said, I've just come off of a shoot for 2020. It's a new show in New York. And he said, we were out in Kansas and Missouri, a big crew. And he said, we were filming animals. out on various ranches. They had an ear missing, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals. He said it was really weird. There was no blood, no tracks around the animal. And he said every single time that we would get out of the crew van, pull out the camera and the Nagra, and we would head to do the filming, none of the battery packs would work. I said, what do you mean the battery packs wouldn't work? He said, I'm not kidding. He said, we put on the belts and we would go to the scene and we had no charge. He now has 100% of my attention. Back then, our lives lived or died on whether we had battery belts and enough of them to support documentary production on a 24/7 when you were on a shoot. That is why I started to investigate what became the legendary A Strange Harvest. Animal mutilations in the world. I wanted to find out why battery packs would not work. And that led to a fascinating discussion with, I believe it was Rune Arledge. And we were, he was New York and I was CBS in Denver, but I called him up as a peer and said who I was, and I was working on documentaries, and I wanted to confirm that an audio man said, you shot 100,000 feet of double system film, but that you couldn't keep the batteries going. He said, that's right. I said, well, what are you doing with all the film that you shot? He said, we trashed it. I said, why did you trash it? He said, because we're in the business of news, and we never could get any answers to what was killing the animals.
Oh, wow.
So, this is what set Linda Moulton Howe on a path that would go the next 40 years to this hour and day sitting with you. I want to know why the battery packs would not function in the field, and I want to know what would be killing, mutilating animals and not leaving blood or track. The next 9 months of my life, because I was the manager of this department in the TV station, so I could pick exactly what I wanted to do. For 9 months, 18 hours a day without break, having to apologize to my husband and my daughter. I am in a subject that I have to keep going until it's over. And so they became used to my not being able to go anywhere on weekends for 9 months. When the film Strange Harvest was broadcast, it was on May 25th, 1980. It was a 90-minute special. We were in Arbitron and Nielsen ratings then, and for the first time ever, not before or since, we got a 19 rating and a 37 share. It was the single largest audience ever. Why? It said to me that I was in a subject that people knew a great deal about, not communicating.
Yeah, that's so
Because
true.
it was like a bomb went off at the station. The switchboard were apologizing, Linda, we cannot keep up with all the calls for you. The mail started coming in these huge gray canvas bags. And people forget that in May of 1980, you had a typewriter, you had a pen, you had a landline. There was no other way to communicate. So when people are dragging in huge bags, those are all handwritten or hand-typed letters. They came with photographs. They came with drawings. And these letters, maybe 1,000 came in within 2 or 3 weeks. I have never told anyone this before. Letter after letter. It was as if I had opened up a spigot to the world, and that the revelation was not just animal mutilation worldwide. It was that my fellow human beings were sitting on some of the most astounding encounters and experiences, and it was all hidden. And that was probably the main turning point, was to realize that I was seeing coming into my office all of these unstated, unseen experiences with what people were writing were extraterrestrial. Now, when I was doing the documentary, it was the sheriffs and the deputies. Linda, the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. But I couldn't prove that. So I did a 90-minute special that was showing what was in the landscape, what were ranchers saying, and on and on. So now I'm at a point, if there are these many people that are writing and showing and sending photos, then this is what I want to do a follow-up. And that led to the third reason why I persisted for the next 40 years. I got a call from the general manager, my boss at the station. And he said, in words that sounded very serious, I want you to come up. I knew him he had traveled with me to a national Emmy nomination ceremony in New York. A series of films that I had done had an Emmy nomination. He had collaborated, he had supported, he ran the station, but we were really good friends. And when I walked in through his door that day, I could tell in his eyes something's wrong. And he said, very seriously, Linda, I know that you want to follow up A Strange Harvest, but I'm here to tell you, we're not going to lose sponsors over you investigating UFOs.
Oh, you mean that huge rating didn't inspire them to?
No, this is what I began to understand. Because I ran into it later, and that's what I'm saying, it's the third peg of this enormous chessboard. Obviously, somebody in the CIA or NSA had come to him, or had gone through an intermediary, and said, you're not going to budget or support Linda Moulton Howe on any more programs on animal mutilations and UFOs. And I still remember leaving that office feeling that this man that I thought was a friend and a supporter was telling me that where I could see 1,000 projects, that it would be cut off in terms of support by the station. Now, over the 40 years, I wanted to get to the bottom of the questions of who, what, and why with the mutilating animals. But what happened that day made me so angry that it was the energy of anger that kept me going from Channel 7 into the thousands of miles it feels like I have traveled on this planet trying to answer these other questions. And the anger is when you know that you are, in my case, you're an investigative reporter, and the only thing that you really respect is the pressure of fact.
Yeah.
That is my life. It always has been. And that you are inside of a station that for up until that discussion, you are still the loyal American who thinks that they are protected by a Constitution and a First Amendment that honors the Fourth Estate as a check and balance on the government. And up until that moment, that is what you lived, that is what you thought, that was your paradigm. That conversation was the beginning of tearing all of that down. And between 1980 and the broadcast of A Strange Harvest and 1985, for only 5 years, I would leave the station in order to sign a contract with Home Box Office in New York. They wanted me to do an hour special for HBO called UFOs, the ET Factor. In starting that production, I run into the United States government in insidious ways, spying ways, blocking ways. And over the next 5 years, as I tried to do that project and was blocked, and HBO made demands that they wanted a statement confirming animal mutilations were being done by extraterrestrials, that Roswell was in fact the crashing of extraterrestrial vehicles, that all of the material that I was being promised by government sources, HBO said, if you can bring to us confirmation from the President of the United States, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we will go forward with this project. It's a true story. When I said to the executive who was giving me, this is their list, to go forward with the funding of the documentary that I'd already signed a contract with it. If I am not able to deliver those letters to you from those people, what is the deadline that you would give me in terms of funding this project? And they said, we'll give you 6 months. If you can bring us back authorities and proof by October of 1985, we will go forward. So that was now the final, I'm going to call it the fourth reason that I'm sitting here today. It was no longer even hypothetical that the government of the United States was blocking me in every direction that I went. And there was something in me. I was born with a, as my mom would say, whatever you put your mind to, you do. Kind of stubbornness and willfulness, especially when I think that something is wrong. And I felt that suddenly, and this is really important to today's 2019 audience, it took until 1985, and I was born January 20th, 1942. And I was born and raised and evolved as an American citizen, protected by a constitution that was more to me than a piece of paper, that we lived in a nation that had a lifestyle, a political foundation, and a resolve to remain free of, by, and for the people with an independent press. And in doing the animal mutilation investigation and everything that I ran into, challenged every one of those words.
I've heard that so often from some of the American folks that
Yes.
I've interviewed, and friends, I may say.
And when you hit that moment, it may be difficult for somebody who lives in Iran or Turkey or the West, or there is something about being born and evolving inside of what the United States was. After 1945, it was the United States that was like the 800-pound gorilla on the planet that had helped save the UK and the Allies. At 45 to 79 and then to 85, it isn't really that long. What I meant was I was born and grew in that era where the United States of America stood for everything good, free, and encouraging every single individual to always be able to stand up. And the United States was, you grow up and you stand up for what you think is right. You vote for who you think is right. And nobody is telling you no. And so in a very short period of time, it was demonstrated for me, I am being stopped by my government. And then,
Were there threats?
oh gosh, that's what I was coming to. I have never ever, and never will, talk about everything that I know that the United States government did to hurt me, block me. And I'll tell you why. It's exactly the parallel with what happened with those 27 guys at Stanford. It's exactly the same. And the government takes advantage of it. If you stand up and whine, if you stand up and say the government is against me, you are automatically, in any country on this planet, put into a category called a conspiracy theory. It's unfair, but I knew that intuitively in every other way, that I cannot take the stage that I had. I cannot go to the media in which I work and say anything that I'm saying to you now. I knew it. So I remained extremely silent, and I began to analyze, how does the government block me? They follow me everywhere. My phone was tapped. The phone company said there is a legal tap on your phone. And you can either back off and say, I'm not going to do that, it's too difficult. Or in my case, just like I wanted to know what stopped the batteries. How could animals weighing 2,000 pounds be on face powder dirt with an ear, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals, and rectum cord out, and not a single track? Not their tracks, no other tracks around these bodies, with law enforcement saying, whatever is doing this, it has to be coming from the sky, it has to be taking these animals someplace else where they are mutilated, that's why there's no blood, and then they have to be being put back. And law enforcement didn't want the public to know that they knew that was happening, because not only is the government trying to block me, but we have all these forces in society. You can't tell the public something that will scare them. And so pretty soon, over time, is the problem with the United States now. Everything began to be disconnected from reality and from fact. And so in my case, I'm realizing I have no place to turn except myself.
How did your family
It did
take
something
it?
to me. Well, I was married, and my husband, I'll give you an example, and it kind of reflects, it's a metaphor for the world. I still can remember driving up to Sterling, Colorado, my very first discussion with the sheriff, who was retiring. That's why he was willing to talk with me. If he had not been retiring, he would not have. And I spent about 6 or 7 hours in a little vacuum shop that he had started after he retired. But he had taken all of his color Polaroids that he had personally taken to box 266. And he said, why don't you introduce yourself to mutilations by going through my Polaroid? So I asked him, I said, I like to put things in chronological order. Can I sit on your floor? And he said, yes. So I took all of his 266 Polaroids and separated them chronologically. And I was seeing case after case that just from the Polaroids, you knew that you were looking at something that was incomprehensible.
Did you see a pattern of timing over months?
All of those 266 Polaroids have been taken between 1971. I was there talking to him in September of 79. So there were 8 years represented. It was a bell-shaped curve.
Okay.
There was a huge surge of animal mutilations between 74 and 76. So that would be the most dates. And it was right there on the floor. When I started asking him, how could this steer be lying on this powdery ground and the head was down in a hole? I'm asking him, how is this possible? And he said, we were stumped by this too. He said, when the deputy and I were approaching this animal and we could see there was just dust and no tracks, I said, we'll stay out 12, 15 feet, we'll circle the whole scene taking photographs, which is what I was looking at. He said, we could both see the head was down in a hole and the rest of the body is just on flat powder. And he said, when we started getting closer and we realized it's the still classic pattern, the ear missing, eye, jaw, so forth. And I said to the deputy, let's measure this hole. And he said it was 8 inches from the surface down. And he said, as we were measuring, the deputy and I both looked at each other and said, whatever did this, excised the tissue, paralyzing the animal on the ground and leaving only the head to move. And that the 8-inch hole had been dug through the agony of the animal. And that's why only the head was down. And to show you how remarkable and weird, Polaroid after Polaroid, the legs of that, it was steer, the hooves, it was perfect, front and back. Nothing had moved. There was no line, you would think that an animal in agony, they would have left only the head. At that point was another defining paradigm, because I said to the sheriff, what you're describing here is incomprehensible cruelty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Linda, he said it bothers us too, because we feel that it's being flaunted in our faces. You can't do this. You can't even figure out how it is done. That was the beginning of the whole other transition about this. I had loved astronomy. I had always had telescopes. I loved being out at night. And when I started on animal mutilations in that day, was the first night of my life that I remember driving back with a sunroof. And I was very nervous. Now, I have paid attention to my own evolution. I'm not and never have been trying to scare anybody about anything. And I'm living proof that I have walked in dozens of pastures by myself with scalpels, with formalin to collect tissue from mutilated animals to get to pathologists. And once, when I was kneeling down by one particular animal, I remember thinking, you are really vulnerable here. And kind of looking at the sky and thinking, if this intelligence that can paralyze an animal and leave only the head, maybe as an experiment, is demonstrating how cruel it can be. Taking me out is nothing. And then what you find, just like the ranchers, just like the deputies, just like the sheriffs, just like the police, everybody reaches these paradigm penetrating moments, and mine was, if extraterrestrials want to take me out, beam me out, do whatever they want, it will happen. And I cannot worry. And so compartmentalization begins to come into the picture. And I don't really remember ever being afraid. More than anything else, what kept growing in me was anger. Anger that all of these animals, and by then I'm learning that it's happening around the world, going back to the early 60s, it is affecting every animal, every domestic animal, wild animals, reindeer, elk, this goes on and on. And it's that anger. It's a kind of anger that you feel that you are betrayed because your own government that you thought was epitome of by and for the people, and all of the rhetoric and all of the constitutional paper was real and meant something. And then you're in a situation like I'm in, and there is nowhere to turn throughout history, throughout centuries. The only people on the planet who have ever had power are those that wield money. And then it was becoming clear, you begin to find out what has happened to reporters on some stories that are considered to be a risk to the government. And reporters have lost jobs, been blocked. So it's a subtle kind of control that made me even more angry. And I guess what I'm saying to you today is that anger has sustained me for 40 years. Now, if you jump to 2019, I think I'm sitting here because I felt so betrayed as an American citizen by my government. And I wanted the United States that I thought I grew up in to be back. And that I naively thought that if I could just keep following the animal mutilation story that led to extraterrestrials, that led to law enforcement and ranchers who had seen beams of light literally lift up an animal but wouldn't stand in front of the camera, but I would find somebody who would tell the truth, that I could break open single-handedly the truth. I really was fueled by that for a long time. And then in the whole evolution from animal mutilations to the human abductions to the revelations about the true nature of the government that you are in, to the fact that you now know that technology is being back engineered from retrieved UFO crashes, that the government still denies there is nothing, we are alone in the universe. The idea that anyone is going to be able, just by showing the truth, chain a government that becomes locked into black money and secret space programs is an illusion. And what do? These are all the things that I'm sharing with you that have been part of my path.
And that's what I'm interested too. You know, your family, your friends, they must have been also really worried for you too.
No, it's the opposite. The vast majority of people, including my husband then, thought it was ridiculous.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's the part.
I didn't expect that.
No.
I really didn't expect that.
Living with it, well, so what? So what? We still have to get up in the morning and go to work.
Well, that's true as well.
And animal mutilations and ETs and human abductions and government cover-up and UFO crashes and who is on Mars, who is in the moon, who is throughout the solar system, the Milky Way galaxy. That's what I wanted to know. But other people don't even go there. You're living a life of becoming an island. And within that, you either find strength out of your own determination to keep finding out what the facts are, which that's my case. And then there's a crossfade. I think it happened with me maybe 15 years ago. The crossfade is you have been on an island, you are surrounded by cross currents and deception, and you begin to realize that you have amassed enough evidentiary information, whether it's laboratory, documents, or even firsthand testimony.
This is the ET newsroom at Manchester, the Awake and Aware UFO conference.
That I'd like to share with you what I think is the single most pivotal event in my extraordinary life. My father worked for the state of Idaho. He was director of aeronautics, and he built backcountry airports. And when I was in high school, the only thing I really wanted to do was to go to college. And my father said, I don't have the money to put you through college. He said, but I am a member of the Boise Lions Club, and they do the Miss America pageant in Atlantic City. And he said, why don't you get in touch with, and gave me a name, and this paper was put in for me to enter the Miss Boise pageant, and I won. And I went to the Miss Idaho pageant, and I won. It's set up and went to Atlantic City. But that summer, these to get the money to go to college, I told my dad, because he could fly, I said, would you take my brother and a cousin and me up to Johnson Creek, which was on a tributary of the Salmon River. And I knew the country really well, and I said, there is a mountain there, I'd like to climb it every day to tighten my body, because you have to go on these ramps in swimsuits. Dad was happy to do that, so my brother goes fishing, my cousin reading, and twice a day I would climb this mountain up to the top and come down, doing this for at least 10 days. There was nothing new, the same path, only one goal, to make my body as fit as possible. And in this particular instance, when I got to the top of this hill, it was late in the afternoon. The sun was already behind the mountain, but the sky was still that beautiful twilight. There were orange beams in a ponderosa pine that I had never seen the color. And when I tell you this, I still don't know what happened. I'm just saying I was completely entranced by seeing beautiful orange beams, like sunlight, coming down through a tree. And all I want to do is go and touch those beams of light. And I can still see it now, that as I start moving from the path to go to where those beams of light, that everything goes into extreme slow motion. And I know that I'm walking, and I know it's like this. And the very next memory, I have no memory what happened. I am at the bottom of the path. The light is still twilight, and there is a flower, and it is pulsing, orchid white light. I'd never seen anything like it. And I'm standing there watching this flower pulsing this orchid white light. And then I looked around, and every one of the late afternoon, early evening stars were pulsing exactly the same rhythm, same. I look up on the mountain, I've come down, and it looked just like the Van Gogh painting that he did with the energy coming. And then look out, and everywhere, every flower, every star, everything is pulsing. This orchid white light. And then I was standing there in awe, and something that felt like warm jello, it wasn't me, began lifting my hands up. I still remember being astonished as I watched my own hands be brought up in front of me. And then this thought voice inside of my head said, you are one with the light is one with you, and you are in the hands of God forever. And I'm looking at my hands at a lot of levels, what is happening here. And yet, there was something about it that just went to the soul core of me. As I looked back out to the world, whatever this was that was holding my hands, let my hands release back. And I have never seen the world the same since. Whether I am doing the hardest work for 24, 48 hours, or I am someplace having a meal, that scene, those words, that light will come in to my mind.
It's really powerful. I can feel the emotion of it. I feel incredibly touched and moved by that myself. I really, really do.
That is
powerful.
the
Wow.
true essence. That everything we are looking at as matter world is actually
I know.
pulsing white orchid light. If everybody knew it to their core, how could humans kill each other?
I know.
And so that is what kept me going through all of this. And I'm now 77 years around the sun. This is really important. If you look at the evolution of your growth, your soul is getting stronger.
Yeah.
If you are not eating poison all the time, your
Sure.
body can
Yeah,
remain
absolutely.
strong. Each revolution around the sun, go out and celebrate it. Try to tie yourself to that orchid white light that pulses. I do. I try to do it. And I feel that if we were on a planet that taught this, the people, it wasn't lip service, a page in an unread book, that we were on a planet where people were actually learning how to find a connection between their soul animus, the energy of this universe, and something taught me that day when I was 21 years old in that mountain. And I went from there to Atlantic City. And I mean, what an opposite. Everything is photographing you, and you're in parades and you go in a swimsuit, but all the back was, I have just been shown what the real matter world is, and there must be a reason. And look at how my life has unfolded to this day.
Extraordinary.
In relation to Linda's comments about the US government and her experience of it, by way of a closing comment, at the end of December 2021, I would say there was quite a correlation between what she's experienced and what is happening globally. Just my opinion.
And I have to thank Linda Moulton Howe for sharing. Thank you. I need
Thank
a hug
you.
for that.
Well,
Really still feel it's like pulsing in me.
it is the pressure effect in my life, and humans deserve so much more.
We do.
And we are a new species by intelligences that have been taking advantage. So that's,
Aren't we
that's
at this
ultimately-
exciting pivot point though? So, God, it's
was
exciting to be
brilliant.
here. Thank
well,
you
I
so
don't
much.
realize listening, because I'm trying to work on my autobio.
No, a lot
And
of good things came
I
out.
just outlined.
I'll send you this.
Would you
Of
please?
course I will.
Because I think I never uttered anything.
You'll
in
have
that
to give me a little bit of
sequence before,
time.
But I think that's where I need. That's sort of where I.